All right, all right, all right. Good APUSH people. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this evening's super fantastic.
All right. Good APUSH people.
Review.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to this.
Let's make sure to take care of that echo right there. And we are now live and going to be working toward understanding a big part of our period 4 content and look at a few questions with stimulus based questions and make sure that we can look at that. So remember the rules. If you are joining us on the chat, you have to make sure that you are using your real name. You have to keep the chat appropriate. You have to keep your chat responding to what we're doing in the video and not necessarily having your own side conversations since it's one big room. And definitely participate when we're asking the questions, but definitely also keep the comments to what we're doing. Also, if you have any questions that are not related to whatever it is we're doing at that moment, then you will want to make sure you hold those questions until the end, because I won't entertain them during the time that we're in the middle of something on here. So I want to make sure that we keep this productive and that we keep this something that's going to be useful for all of you. So that being said, glad to have you with me. And I won't be able to go too terribly late tonight, but we can do what we can with the time we have. So the first thing we're going to do is the thing that you asked me for the most, and that is going to be a period 4 Kahoot. So here we go. I'll get that going for you guys so that you can all have so much fun. And we'll make sure that you're all happy with that. Okay, so here we go. Get our PIN number here. PIN number is 817662. Go ahead and get joined. Please keep your screen names clean on here so that we don't have any issues with inappropriateness. Extreme vetting, tax the Bank of the United States. Glad you guys are keeping it real to the content. We have the Supreme. Got Derek, Ida, Daniels in. A kill the Bank of the United States. No live chat. Old Hickory. Jackson sucks. Dubs. Chat is enabled, my friends. Maybe you might need to refresh your YouTube screen, but it's definitely enabled. I'm watching it. Okay. This is all we're going to get. We got some more people coming. Hi, Cameron. Dave Sellis and Troy Manzano. Please make sure that you refresh your browser for YouTube and make sure that you refresh, and you should be able to see the chat because there's definitely chat going. Yes, Colin, you can join us for, you can hang out and blow off your OChem homework, but poor OChem. Is it Colin or is it Willie? Sorry, Willie. My bad. I forget these things. Don't hold it against me. Okay, we're going to go a couple more minutes, maybe 30 seconds or so before we making sure that we get everybody who wants to be in the Kahoot on the Kahoot, and we'll get going. Let's see how much you remember, Willie Gal. We'll see. Dave Sellis, I have a Diet Coke from Circle K. So we got some people. Oh, we got Troy is trash talking. Mark is Ocean. So somebody's saying I'm Ocean Desku. Gabby's got her 2 pens and highlighter and whiteout ready. Don't want to be roasting too much. All right, we're going to start this game. Going to get this show on the road. Okay, so remember, we're going to keep our chat from this point forward on the topic. We are not going to roast anybody, unless it's me. And we won't go through all 26 questions probably, but let's take a look here. Here we go. Revolution of 1800 was characterized by. I'm sorry if there's no music. You got music now. Ooh. So, the peaceful transition of power between the political parties. So somebody said it's the first question and you don't remember. Willie, I'm disappointed. I must not have taught you anything. So what we want to remember is that this was the first test of the transition between presidents where there were political parties, because they did not envision political parties when they drafted the Constitution. And they did believe that they did not believe that there could even be such a thing. So we know that the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republicans form during Washington's administration. So when they do have the election of 1800, what was not foreseen was able to happen, and happen peacefully, which was a transition between parties. And nothing fell apart. There was no revolution. There were no literal war, let's put it that way. No fighting, no bloodshed, and the system worked. And of course, what other thing happened in the election of 1800 with Thomas Jefferson being chosen? What other thing happened that made this a notable election and could be added into the whole revolution part? See what we get from the people. So Alan says decided by the House. Jessica said, was it that Jefferson appeased both sides? Drew says it was a tie and had to go to the House. Jake said, what was the question? Jessica just arrows up. Jasmine retracted her message. Gabriella said it went to the delegates. Well, you have to be a little more specific on that one. Jessica says the House had to vote because the Electoral College was tied. Yes. So the House of Representatives had to decide the election because there was a tie at the Electoral College, which was the first time that had happened. And it also showed that the Constitution is designed worked. So Jessica had mentioned that Jefferson may have appeased both sides, and she asked kind of as a question mark. And that is definitely something that I would say makes him a skilled politician, that in his first inaugural address, we can see that Jefferson obviously acknowledges that both parties exist. You know, we were all Democrats and we were all Federalists, and or we're all Republicans and we're all Federalists. So he definitely is trying to make the point that we need to unify a little bit here. We all have the same interest at heart. And so that's a good thing to point out there, Jessica. And I think that definitely makes for a good politician on Jefferson's part. So nicely done, my friends. Let's see where we're at on our leaderboard. Millen is at the top. I know he is the one to beat. And Millen, I'm going to tell you that I did challenge somebody to see if they could beat you tonight. So, but we have Supreme, Weird Al, Kahoot, and Kill the Bank of the United States in our top 5 leaderboard. So let's go to the next one. The territory highlighted in the map was acquired by Roger. I'm glad you said it. Somebody misses this question, with you on that one. Okay, so the correct answer here is the Louisiana Purchase. So therefore, it was unloaded in a fire sale by Napoleon, who needed to get money and get rid of it and couldn't actually defend anything with it. So he got rid of it. Plus, he's having some little squabbles with Spain. He doesn't want them to get it as well. So a couple things to remember, though, is when you're looking at that map, oftentimes with territorial acquisition, what you'll find is that there'll be a map with a shaded area, and you'll have to identify some questions response with regard to, you know, what is this area basically? How was it acquired or something along those lines? There is a map on the website right under the Unit 4, or excuse me, APUSH Period 4 unit guide that's available for you to use if you'd like. So yeah, so there you go. Okay, so loving the humor. Remember, we don't want to get too bad. Jake Berman, I'm sorry it feels bad. So let's see where we're at now. As Millen said, he got knocked off from his phone. We know that Supreme has now moved to number 1. John C. Calhoun and his Skeletor face is at number 2. Weird Al at number 3. Killed the Bus at a 4, and I Am William coming up here. So I'm liking this. So here we go. Let's see if Millen can get back into the game and make sure he gets in and see if he can get back on the board. Federalists opposed the Louisiana Purchase because Oh, now this is a very interesting turnout with 23 of you saying that the correct answer, that they opposed it because it would add to the Democratic Republican political base. And then 14 of you, or the two of you that chose green, 14 of you need to be writing this down right now, because you have to think about what might be wrong with the phrase offended their strict interpretation of the Constitution. So Ryan Song has written Federalists were loose interpretation, and that is correct. Cameron has said ooh. Drew said mamma mia. Josh Golden said wow. We're going to keep this a little, keep this civil, guys. Federalists are the loose construction. That's correct. And yeah, Davidson said loosey goosey. At least somebody said misread. And thank you for admitting that. Cameron and Jasmine is ripping. A couple of you said that you've dishonored the glorious leader. Okay, I'm not a glorious leader. This is not communism. So Troy has said Democratic Republicans all wanted to move west. So if you have a ton of Western land, you get a lot of Democratic Republican land. Nicely said, Troy. Tim says Feds preferred greater control, greater central government power, which meant loose construction. That is correct as well. And the Jessica says, could a case be made for green? And let's see here. Ryan Sung says that's kind of sketchy. And that is true. So if you're looking at this, supported the ability of the French to fight the English, I guess, Jessica, the only way you can make that case is that the French would have more money to be able to do that. And Napoleon's running around trying to conquer Europe at the time. But I would say that you wouldn't want to go with that, because the Federalists really weren't terribly, they might have been maybe individually that way. So Feds aren't opposed to that, besides the fact that the Democratic Republicans favor them. Yes. So Jessica got it. Never mind, I got it. So let's see here. Let's us go and see where we're at on the board. So John C. Calhoun has come in at number 1. So Skeletor is there. We got Weird Al at number 2, Kill the Bank of the United States. We got Patriot Nation, whatever. And then we get Phoebe. Phoebe, welcome to the board. Love to see you there. So, and let's keep off the, let's go away from the communism right now. We don't even know that exists yet in American history. So, Roger, you're 4th. Great. Love it. Here we go. Jefferson enacted the embargo of 1807 on England and France in response to 18 seconds left. We're here in easy game. Emily's saying it's the orange one. But when it's really the green one. So, so let's look at this. Take this one a little bit. They continued harassment of American ships by France and Great Britain. So the other one, the red one, is actually correct as well. That the Chesapeake Leopard affair had also happened. So We know that Jefferson believed that, you know what, if they can't leave us alone as a supposed neutral country and they want to interfere with our ability to trade, if they're going to try to take American ships, if they're going to impress American sailors, we're going to just not trade with anybody. And so we know that that is the stated reason for the embargo. We know that there's all kinds of other reasons that people suspect as being part of the reason for the Embargo Act, or excuse me, the reasons for its success, excuse me. And of course, we know that it inadvertently put us on a path to industrialization in the United States that would have maybe made Jefferson cringe at the time. So, okay, so now let's take a look where we're at. John C. Calhoun, you're still at number 1. Weird Al number 2. Kill the Bank number 3. Pat's Nation is at number 4, and Kahoot is lit, and that is at number 5. So yay, hooray. Here we go. A primary cause of the War of 1812 was okay, let's take a look here. We got the new desire of a generation, or the desire of a new generation and politicians to go to war. So I see Colin says, hi, this is Colin. Great. Tim, leave me alone. Let's see, just wants to have fun. I live at school. That's correct. Warhawks, Emily, were bored and angry. Correct. Gabriella said, yep. And so let's see here. No universal selfishness. Okay, stop with the communism or I'm going to kick you out of the room. So Daniel Wong says, to Canada, to Canada, Canada. Yes. Emily, you said the Warhawks were bored. Well, I don't know if I would say completely bored. So we could say that they were anxious to get more land, and they wanted to go to war. So we are going to look at this from the standpoint of trying to make sure that we think that that the Warhawks are the Western people. They say they want war. They want Canada. They want to annex Canada. They are angling for war. They're claiming at the same time that all of America's rights are being trampled all over by the British and the French, and they were. So let's see how you all turn out on this one. And remember, if you're taking this quiz and you're one of the people that are getting answers incorrect, just make sure that you have, that you're taking some notes so you know to make sure to go back and reread, for example, in this case, the primary causes of the War of 1812. So let's see, we got Weird Al at number 5. John C. Calhoun has been unseated down to number 2. Kill the Bus holding steady at 3rd place. Pat's Nation on fire at number 4. And we got Kahoot is lit at number 5. So let's see what we have next. The event that elevated Jackson to national fame was the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Battle of New Orleans, Battle of Bull Run, or the Battle of the Thames. Yes, Jake Berman, this is easy. Roger Cash Money. Correct, correct, correct. The Battle of New Orleans. New Orleans. So remember, hi Tal, welcome. Keep in mind, the Battle of Tippecanoe is not going to be for Andrew Jackson. Ty Schultz, you just said Tippecanoe, and Tyler too, so that's awesome. And we know that the Tippecanoe was William Henry Harrison, and Bull Run is during the Civil War. I think Drew is getting ready to say. The Battle of the Thames isn't anything in American history. Thames, well, actually, I think there is a renamed Thames River somewhere in the Northeast, but it's in England otherwise. So let's keep in mind that the Battle of New Orleans is where Andrew Jackson gets his fame partially. What else contributed to Andrew Jackson's national fame? Jessica says the Florida thing. Can we elaborate on Florida? Horseshoe Bend. Hangs like a few British for helping Indians, attacking the Indians in Florida. There you go. So yes, Andrew Jackson was considered a wonderful Indian killer and the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, which of course happened in 1815 after the war had been, after a ceasefire had been declared. They just hadn't gotten the memo. So one of the things that I'm going to start doing is I'm blocking the people who are going to talk about anything to do with czars, communism, or football. Keep this on track or I'm going to keep you out. So good old Hickory, that's correct. So Andrew Jackson. Now somebody asked about, can you talk about fame or infamous? So what you want to think about here is that he's got a lot of infamous about him as well. And it's a matter of the eye of the beholder. In the eyes of the 1820s beholders, he was just peachy. So, so Tim has asked, why is he called Hickory? He forgets. Troy says he's like a tree and he has leaves. No. Why is he called Old Hickory? Jasmine. Old Hickory because he was a strict and bold military officer during the War of 1812. Alan says the Battle of the Thames was against Tecumseh. Yes, it was. And certainly not with Andrew Jackson. And like I said, I started to correct myself when I started to say it was a river in England, but there is one in Connecticut. So here we go. Dave, you are on parole now. That's your timeout. Keep the information focused and not speaking about extraneous matters. All right, Weird Al, you're at number 1. John C. Calhoun was unseated and still at number 2. Kill the Bus, holding strong at 3. The Kahoot Lit, you are now at number 4. And Mitali has hit the top 5 at 66.74, and Old Hickory looks like that person is the one to beat because they are climbing. All right, here we go. So the orders in council. Ooh. Emily, you're going to go in timeout. Oh, it is red and blue. So we no longer need Old Hickory facts. And let's see here. You have it allowed for the impressment of American sailors and required neutral ships to trade in British ports first. So you both are right on that one. There are two correct answers here. And what you want to look at is, where are the orders in council a thing? Jessica said they're a thing in Britain. That is correct. So this is an English thing. Great Britain has orders in council, and that is what this is about. So what you're looking at is the interesting thing. If you're the Americans at the time, required neutral ships to trade in British ports first. That's an interesting proclamation by the British government, because why would they have to travel there first? They could go straight to the European mainland if they wanted to. The problem is if you're going to get to Northern Europe, you got to go around England and the British Isles. So they can run blockades and keep these things from happening. So, okay, so nicely done. Let's see where we're at. Weird Al, you're at number 1. You have unseated John C. Calhoun, so Skeletor is back at 2. Kill the Bus still holding strong at 3rd. Kahoot and Vitali 4th and 5th. Someone named Bob is making a comeback. So here we go. The Hartford Convention. Let's see what you guys are going to choose. That's correct. Should make many of you feel good. So it's another 2-answer one. Hooray, hooray. So think of it like this. Why does it kill the Federalist Party? Why is the Hartford Convention seen as being the place where the Federalist Party begins to die? Everyone laughed at them for being unpatriotic. Hartford kills feds because they opposed the war. They timed it wrong. Ryan Sung says it completely undermines them. They look anti-nationalist, Grace says. Ryan says that, and then they get wrecked. Okay, so let's think about this for just a second. So who, I'm going to stop. Let's see here. Tim says they seem like traitors. Dave says it was the last effort at Federalist trying to have power, and it failed horribly. Troy says, didn't they try to secede or something? It was the last attempt to gain members, and it failed miserably due to their timing. Alex has said it is after we, quote unquote, win the war. And so, Jessica, hold on just a moment. Couple of things here. First of all, I'm going to go to Ryan for just a minute. Ryan, you said that the Hartford Convention completely undermines them and they get wrecked. So who is being undermined? The feds are being undermined. So hold on here. The Hartford Convention is undermining the feds. Are you saying the Federalist? Okay, so Jessica has clarified the feds, meaning the Federalist parties. So, okay, now you're telling me, let me make sure that I understand this. The Hartford Convention undermines the Federalist Party? In what way would it undermine the Federalist Party? Because of the fact that they low-key are going against the wishes of big government they desired. Alex says, after the Battle of New Orleans, being an American felt awesome, so therefore the current system looked perfect, and the Federalists tried to change things so it looked bad and undermined them. Okay, I think where we're coming down here is where you're saying undermine. So I want you to think for just a second about what undermine means. So let me put it kind of this way. When you're looking at the idea of undermine, what I would say is that the Federalist Party was trying to undermine the rest of the country, since they didn't think that the war was just. They were very much against all of the lead up to the war with regard to the embargo and the non-intercourse acts. Macon Bill number 2. None of these things helped them financially. They had lost a ton of money, and they had been basically, they felt like they had been burned by the rest of the country. So when you go back to it, Jessica's question as to why the yellow is working here with makes demands to the government for changes beneficial to New England, what they wanted to do was limit what the federal government was able to do in order to make sure that they could not be so hurt by the wishes of other sections of the country. So one thing that the War of 1812 does is it shows very much how the sectionalism in the country has begun to take hold. And it shows very much how people are beginning to think not from a national perspective, but simply from what benefits their section. When you look at it from that perspective, when I say undermined, and I asked about your undermined part, the Federalists would appear to be undermining the federal government, who had successfully, in their minds, prosecuted a war against Britain and quote unquote won it. Which again, remember, the War of 1812 was won because they didn't lose, and we know that that the British weren't able to really turn any attention to the war because they were also dealing with the Napoleonic Wars. But what we do know is that when you look at the Federalists, they appeared to be completely out of touch at that point because they wanted to limit Congress's power to declare war. They wanted to, by making it a 2/3 vote, they wanted to limit when any kind of embargoes or any kind of trade barriers were put up, so that they would not be so financially hurt. So they're only thinking about changes that are beneficial to New England in that regard. So that was that quiz question that you also had, where it asked why the Federalists, the main goal of the Hartford Convention. And so somebody said, didn't somebody say secede? So when you look at the secession issue, that was not their main goal. They did not meet to come up with a plan to try to secede New England from the United States. What they did do is you have really radical members, one of them being like Aaron Burr, who are running around saying that they should secede. And that is really, besides the fact that they appear to have been completely out of touch with a government that was seen as being successful, that is also one of the things that did lead to their downfall, but it was not what they were there to do. The question on the quiz, the answer was that they were trying to assert some sort of form of states' rights. So if you're looking from the standpoint that as a group of states, as a region of states, they were unable to make any kind of changes to what was happening in the country because they were being hurt by it. And there's no doubt they were being financially hurt by what was going on. They were trying to assert their right to do that. So let's take a look here. We have Hartford Convention resulted in the supermajority proposal. That's correct. Drew says Aaron Burr was nasty. That's correct. And Jessica says he killed Hamilton. That's correct. What chapter was the Hartford Convention, Tim asks. And Jessica thinks it was 12. And Gabby says feels bad because it's Hamilton. So let's go back to our quiz and our cahoots. So let's take a look here, see where we're at. Weird Al, you're still at number 1. You have not been unseated by John C. Calhoun again. Kill the Bus is still at number 3. Cahoots has gone to number 4. And Matali, you're at number 5. So awesome, awesome, awesome. Let's see what our next question is. Tariff, transportation, and national bank. What do these 3 things belong to? So, Jessica says, your boy Henry Clay, he would not compromise his love for any of you, but he is known as the great compromiser, and he did come up with the American system, and I am so happy that many of you were able to do that. Now, the market revolution is something that would have been further benefited by the American system, and the market revolution is encouraging the idea of needing the American system, but it is not in and of itself the reason for tariff, transportation, national bank, and is not associated with that. So let's take a look at where we're at with score-wise. Weird Al, we've got almost, wow, look at this. We've got Weird Al at number 1, John C. Calhoun hanging on at number 2. Kill the Bank of the United States is at number 3 now, still kind of in that little realm. But Natali, you've gone to number 4, and Grace has hit the top 5. So Alan is really happy that he is the new Millen. But if you take a look at Alan, Millen did get kicked out of the game because his phone died or something. So. But I'll let you have the glory. So now let's take a look and see. And congratulations, Grace, for making top 5, and of course Matali earlier. Let's see the next question. The architect of the American system was, we've already answered. Thank you. It is Henry Clay. No, it is not Lucifer or Satan. And it's not a Jeffy. Henry Clay is not Satan. And I actually think that Henry Clay is a really good guy, personally. And I think he was done wrong by AJ. But but that's just my opinion. But Henry Clay, we already answered that in the last question. So let's see here. We got JC has now unseated Alan as number 1 and Kill the Bus. You're still holding strong and firm at number 3. Natalia is at number 4 and Kahoot Lit has come back. But Armand has hit answer streak number 7. So let's see. Here we go. The American system was opposed by. Oh, if you guys don't get this, I'm going to totally kick all of you out of the chat. Good job, Armand. Well, rip Grace, but you had 3 possible answers here. Interesting that the South was the most chosen because we do know that the president didn't like it either. And Federalists obviously don't like it either, although I don't know why. They really weren't terribly excited about it because it really would have helped them in the long run. But yeah, so, and then of course Andrew Jackson. And he was probably against it just because it was Henry Clay. But let's see what we have here. Weird Al, number 1. John C. Calhoun is at number 2. It looks like Kill the Bank of the United States is Drew. But he's trying to get number 2, but isn't getting there. Matali is holding strong at number 4. Kahoot Lit is at number 5. And Extreme Vetting is back in the game with 3 in a row. So Tim has asked, why doesn't the South like the American system? Ryan says because they think it's a waste of money. But why, Ryan, is it a waste of money? Okay, they don't want retaliatory tariffs. They hated tariffs. They hate tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, tariffs. Also keep in mind, yes, the South is not going to like tariffs. Before we get to the Civil War, they're definitely going to be against them. But Jasmine, you just got where I was going. They had canals and stuff, and they didn't want their money going to other infrastructure stuff. So Alan has now added on there, they didn't want to pay for improvements in the North. It doesn't benefit, Grace says, the South as much as it does the North. And Tim says, yeah, they buy stuff from England, right? Yes. And so we are going to ban Reaganomics. Again, I'm about to, I'm going to do this because I told you guys to stop. So timeout for you guys. And let's see our next question. An important change associated with the market revolution was nicely done. The use of the factory system to produce goods and services. So if you take a look at the restriction of work hours for female workers, why is that not correct? Females worked equal hours, Jessica has said. Jasmine just says Lowell system. Alan asks, weren't more female workers employed in factories? Tim says, didn't they have to work like 16 hours a day or something? Everyone suffered under lower wages because labor laws weren't a thing then, and just under the Lowell system, Tim has added. So yes, so didn't Van Buren make universal work hours 10 hours? I don't know, Ryan, did he? I have amnesia. Well, Ryan looks that up. Let's go next. Western land speculation and tightening credit caused so the collapse of Western banks and widespread unemployment is the correct answer. That's important to keep in mind simply because of the fact that this is part of the whole issue with regard to why the wildcat banks were just part of the terrible idea. Remember that the pet banks or the wildcat banks, those are nicknames and they've been given over that. But the first Bank of the United States was not, had expired and was not rechartered. But when we look at Western banks and widespread unemployment, first of all, let's look at Western land speculation. What does that mean? So Jessica said, does that mean inflation? And Alan says, like, people are buying up lots of land and betting the value will go up. And that is correct, Alan. So the idea of Western land speculation was this idea that they would go in, they'd buy up this land, and when buying up this land, it would make they would hold on to it. They'd buy it, quote unquote, cheap, and then they'd hold on to it and then be able to sell it at a handsome profit. But speculation is always a risky move, and if it doesn't pay off as soon as it can, then it can be a money waster for you. And when you look at the practice of land speculation, it's tied to the tightening of credit because some people were buying land on credit. And it's kind of the same thing that will happen with the stock market later on down the road. But if things become too overvalued, they'll eventually come crashing down. So you can kind of look at it like this, like eventually the land was not worth what they paid for it, even though they were paying for it kind of cheap. It bottomed out the market. The bank, there was no central bank and money was going all over the place. People were printing money. It was crazy. It was madness. So here we go. Emily, Reaganomics was the nickname given to the economic program of Ronald Reagan, which is why I told you guys to stop talking about it at the end. Okay. So here we go. John C. Calhoun is streaking with three in a row, streaking ahead. Yeah. So Weird Al, you might be unseated again. But what's interesting how the top five has just kind of been really strong here. So don't worry about this one. We're going to skip it as soon as it comes up because we don't need to know this one. We don't need to know this one either. We do need to know this one. Nice. So this is okay. First of all, I'm going to interrupt to say that Drew just gave the best statement ever. He's been stuck in third for so long and not advancing. He now has a new respect for Henry Clay. Best history related ever. So Dartmouth College versus Woodward ruled in power of a contract over state. Ruled the power of a contract was over state power. This goes back to the idea of the sanctity of contracts, and that the idea here is that in the case of Dartmouth, they'd been granted a charter back during the time of the colony, and they believe that they should not be able to have that charter anymore in the state. And the Supreme Court said, no, sorry. And yes, so not transferring private property in contracts to the state. And one of the issues was that the state didn't exist at the time the charter had been made. It was actually a colony. So nice, Jessica. President of Dartmouth College was deposed by its trustees, leading the New Hampshire legislature, attempting to force the college to become a public institution. Nicely done, Ryan. Let's see if you are getting that offline. Don't want to be plagiarist now. Now, what was the case of ruling against the state granting monopoly to a steamboat? Thank you, Ryan. That's from Wikipedia. So, what was the case that ruled against the state granting a monopoly to a steamboat? Charles River Bridge versus Ogden. Yep. Nope. I know, just kidding. Charles River Bridge versus something. No. Gibbons versus Ogden. That's correct. What's Gibbons versus Ogden? Steamboats, steamboats, steamboats. The ruling that the New York monopoly was unconstitutional, Marshall established the federal government's broad control of interstate commerce. Yeah. Thanks, AMSCO book. So perfect. All right. And then the orange one is the Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge. Okay. And none of the Supreme Court decisions under John Marshall weakened the federal government. So green would not be an appropriate answer. So that being said, where are we at? Weird Al back in first place. John C. Calhoun is not far behind. Poor Henry Clay is at third place. Matali fourth, and Grace back in the top 5. All right. I'm going to do, let's say, one more question from this one, and then I will be posting the link after the study session is over. So here we go. Ooh, should get this one. Boom. So, Commerce Clause in the Constitution states that only the federal government was able to regulate interstate commerce, and therefore there could be no monopoly granted by New York on a steamboat that operated between New York and New Jersey. So Jessica said there's been some question about which clauses are mentioned. Jessica says the contract clause was probably Dartmouth versus Woodward, which is correct. And the interstate commerce had to do with Gibbons versus Ogden. And do we think we need to know the Charles River Bridge decision? Yes, you do need to know the Charles River Bridge decision. Emily, this was not the bridge, this was the steamboat. So, all right. See where we're at. Weird Al number 1, John C number 2. Still got we still got the same 5 here. Let's take a look. The map that you're about to see represents new boundaries as a result of which treaty? Ooh. Jessica says, high key, there are years on the map. Boom. Yes, there were. This is the Adams-Onis Treaty. And remember that the Adams-Onis Treaty was actually between the United States and Spain. So the fact that you see that boundary line going along New Spain and the United States would be a very important clue there. And it also it showed that this land, that Florida was land ceded by Spain, and the other areas were kind of shaded out. So, but if you see a boundary between either Canada or what later is Mexico, those are going to be those are going to be treaties with one of those two countries, and at this time that still belonged to Spain. So, so now some of you are going, wasn't this the Florida one? Yes, Ryan, it was. It also divided Oregon or something. Alan, that is with the British. And now you say you're trolling. Drew is saying it was about the Great Lakes. And are you thinking of the Rush? Okay, the Rush-Bagot Treaty is about the the Rush-Bagot Treaty was about disarmament on the Great Lakes between the British and the American government after, of course, the War of 1812 had been settled. And Great Britain and us couldn't keep large navies on the Great Lakes, and they shared fishing rights. Right. Look at you guys. So Gabby says, did they get parts of California with the Adams-Onis Treaty? No, I can't go back right now, but maybe when it's done, I can try to bring that up for you to see. So taking a look here at our final scores. Weird Al is at number 5. John C. Calhoun is at number 2. And Henry Clay is at number 3. Sorry. And of course, Natalia is at number 4 and Kahoot at number 5, with Daniels in as making a comeback. So ending our quiz, we've got Weird Al at number 1, John C. Calhoun at number 2, and Kill the Bank of the United States at number 3. Woohoo! So, nicely done. And you better be leaving nice feedback, or I'm going to get really, really mad and give you terrible tests tomorrow. But so I want recommending, I want learning, I want good feelings, because this is an era of good feelings. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's get that rating up, please. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. Okay, we've got enough of this. Hooray, hooray. So let's take a look now. And we'll we're going to take a look at some stimulus questions for a few minutes, and then we'll move on. So what I would like to do is take just a moment to take a break, and I will be right back with you, and we'll take a look at those stimulus questions from Albert. So this is your commercial break. I will return shortly. Okay, we're back. So I'm glad that you enjoyed your break. You know, Alexander Hamilton wasn't president, and yeah, he was a little bit kooky. So, and had terrible aim, according to Drew. So nicely done. Let's take a look now and go into some Albert questions to fully understand and appreciate our stimulus questions. So let's take a look here at a couple of different options. I'm going to put us first on, let's see. Let's do the transformation to a participatory democracy, common man politics. So we are going to go first to, let's see. Let's take a look at let's go to Thomas Jefferson. Let's look at the election of 1800. Let's see. So during the contest of opinion through which we have passed, the animation of discussions and exertions has sometimes worn an aspect which might impose on strangers unused to think freely and to speak and to write what they think. This now being decided by the voice of the nation, announced according to the rules of the Constitution, all will, of course, arrange themselves under the will of the law and unite in common efforts for the common good. So we know that this is Jefferson's first inaugural, which is awesome. And let's take a look at the questions. So what issue lied at the heart of the election or the contest of opinion that Jefferson was referring to in his address? The Native Americans constantly attacking settlers living on the frontier. I can zoom in a little bit, yes. So here's the, first of all, here's the stimulus. Let's take a look at this. I read the first paragraph, but every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union or to change its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments to the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated, where reason is left free to combat it. This should look familiar if we looked at it. Okay. So here is the stimulus. Now I'm gonna give you a little something here. Bear with me for just a second. You're not gonna see something for a moment, which is fine. Just hang tight. Let's take a look at something I found and I was gonna share with you at your study session. And let's see here. No. No. Okay, well, then maybe this is not going to work. But if you were looking at stimulus questions, the idea is what you want to do first is you want to first look through and do a skim. Note the information for the source, note the maybe skim through the thing, and then look at the question and see if you have to read the question, the source closely. So let's see here. What issue lied at the heart of the election or contest of opinion that Jefferson was referring it to in this address? Now think about this for just a second. If you look at this question right away and you've looked through here where you see an address by Thomas Jefferson in 1801, Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, you might be able then to not have to read this as closely because you would hopefully know that this is Jefferson's first inaugural address. So take a look at the answer choices that you have here. What issue lied at the heart of the election or the contest of opinion that he's referring to? Native Americans constantly attacking settlers on the frontier, federal government raising tariffs under the Adams administration, the federal government passed legislation which limited freedom of speech, or the federal government passing legislation creating a national bank. Remember, on these, I go with your 4 common answers. So I just have my 4th C. We're starting with Lucy says C, Ryan says C, Alex says C, Lyndon said C. Those were my first four. The rest of you are all saying C. I will submit your answer. And look here, I'll give you a minute to take a look at this. If you like to take any kind of notes, and remember that you can always pause the live stream and then let it catch up if you'd like, because it's also archived at the same time, or you can go in right after it's done and do that as well. But in the election of 1800, there had been the whole debate prior to that with the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts, which is why we took a look at those at the beginning of this unit and not just at the end of the last unit. You might remember that I started our unit off talking about Washington's farewell address, where he guarded against the formation of factions. We can see evidence of sectionalism beginning to form. And he also, of course, warns against entangling alliances. And then we went in to look at the XYZ affair, the demanding of the bribe, the Alien and Sedition Acts from the Federalists, and why they might have been something that was maybe claimed to have been necessary by the Adams administration for the safety of the United States, but the Democratic Republicans and a lot of historians believe that it really was just an anti-Jeffersonian thing. So if you take a look here, that was one of the main things that really was at the heart of maybe the Federalists going too far. We had a United States congressman arrested for violating those laws. We know that the Jefferson and Madison wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which put out there that idea of nullification and operated on the idea of compact theory. And that this was part of why Adams was defeated in the election of 1800. And of course, we've already talked about why it was considered a revolution. So nicely done. Let's take a look at one more regarding this one. Same stimulus. Now, let's take a look at the question. Despite Jefferson's call for being all Republicans and Federalists, what event occurred which suggested a lack of unity? A, members of Congress debated the merits of purchasing Louisiana. B, the United States declared a quasi-naval war with France. C, Federalist judicial appointments created political arguments under the Jefferson administration. Or D, Congress passed a resolution declaring neutrality in the war between England and France. Which one of these four suggests a lack of unity? So I've got my 4 C's from Jake, David, Alex, who says C strikes again. Many of you are in agreement. Let's take a look. Bam, you are correct. So in an attempt to maintain control of one branch of government, John Adams passed the Judiciary Act, and this was the idea of trying to pack the courts full of Federalist judges, hence the nickname Midnight Judges, because it was in the last hours of his presidency. And of course, this leads to the landmark case of Marbury versus Madison. And that gives the Supreme Court the ability to rule on the constitutionality of a law, and it will be extended to them being able to rule a state law unconstitutional as well. So this is a key phrase, remember, from your unit guide. This establishes the concept of what we call judicial review, in which a law can be declared unconstitutional or no longer able to be in effect by the Supreme Court. In other words, some people believe that the Supreme Court has the power to change the way laws are enforced and almost, quote unquote, legislate from the bench, they call it. So this is one of those things where you can see the conflict by the attempt to put in the Midnight Judges and Jefferson refusing to appoint them, leading to this particular case. So here we go. Let's take a look at another question. Let's take a look at Marbury versus Madison. So remember, first glance at the question. Which of the following events during Marshall Court's tenure proved that the Supreme Court had little power to enforce laws it declared unconstitutional? So we look at the answer choices next. Decision of the court to say that the state of Maryland could not tax the national bank. The decision of the court that Congress had the power to regulate interstate commerce. The decision of the court that the Cherokee could remain on their land. Or the decision of the court that the College of Dartmouth could remain a private institution. So take a look at the Marbury versus Madison case, and you should be able to, because you know it's Marbury versus Madison, you should be able to answer the question without even reading this. You're saying C and RIP Cherokee, and that C is on fire tonight, and you are correct. So we know that Marbury versus Madison does the concept of judicial review, and in this case, which you need to know by name, Worcester versus Georgia, Cherokee was the only group that should have jurisdiction over their land. The Cherokee had sued Georgia because of the fact that they were trying to be removed. And Andrew Jackson refused to comply and saying he made the decision, now let him enforce it. And of course, we know that they go to Oklahoma. We will be looking a little more at this later on in the course when we look at some Indian policy overall. So while you do need to know it now, and while it was part of your book, we didn't do a specific lesson on it in class, partially because we'll be covering it kind of topically a little later. But good on you guys for understanding that one. Let's take a look at a medium question here with Marbury versus Madison. So which of the following events sparked the opinion in this case? You already know this one. State of Maryland tried to tax the national bank. The lame duck president tried to increase the number of Federalist judges. The arrest and trial of Aaron Burr, the vice president of the United States, or the election of 1800 between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Ryan says B, David says B, Daniel says B, Jessica says B, Lyndon says B, Gabby says B, Drew says B. Sounds like it's B. Ah! You are correct. We already just talked about this one. Okay, let's go to another one. Let's go to Andrew Jackson. Let's go to the nullification crisis. Here we go. Nullification crisis. Boom. Take a look at the thing. The above political issue reveals which of the following about the 1830s. Let's take a look at South Carolina's Ordinance of Nullification. We, therefore, the people of the state of South Carolina in convention assembled, do declare and ordain that the several acts and parts of acts of the Congress of the United States purporting to be the laws for the imposing of duties and imposts on the importation of foreign commodities, and more especially the Tariff Acts of 1828 and 1832, are unauthorized by the Constitution of the United States and violate the true meaning and intent thereof, are null, void, and in no law, nor binding upon this state, its officers or citizens. And all promises, contracts, obligations made or entered into, or to be made or entered into with the purpose to secure the duties imposed by said acts. So, which of the trends is revealed by this political issue? A rise in democratic participation, nationalism swept the country as a result of military victories over the British, an increase in sectional differences and crises, or the failure of the Constitution to provide methods of compromise. Jessica starts us off with C. Ryan says C. Drew says C. David says C. Lyndon says C. And whoops, sorry. And there we go. Now remember, this gives you a nice little thing that if you want to go back and look at later, you can. We won't leave it up for too long. It talks about the fact that sectional tensions had come about as a result of people looking from the perspective, not of the nation, but of their particular section. And we can see it from the 1780s to the Civil War. Now, remember, sectionalism wasn't quite as recognized-ish and called out as such, but Washington could see it coming. Washington gives you that hint in his farewell address. And then, of course, during the War of 1812, we know that the Hartford Convention is another example of it. The Missouri Compromise is also an issue of sectionalism. Now, we will be talking about that as more of a topical subject regarding the Civil Wars coming, but it is an obvious idea of the sectionalism that comes at the time. Now, when you see the idea that nullify the law, that is by basically just a very, very simple definition, the refusal to acknowledge it, and comes to the idea of a constitutional crisis. Do states have the right and authority to review or to refuse to follow a law? Now, what resolved this particular crisis? What basically put a stop to this? Tim says, AJ, explain. Mitali says, the Compromise Tariff of 1833. It would not be the Missouri Compromise. So, first of all, there's two resolutions to this, as you are starting to see. One is the Compromise Tariff of 1833. Can anyone type in what the Compromise Tariff of 1833 did to resolve the matter? And pardon for a moment, you're going to hear my can of soda open. Reduces the tariff by 10% over 8 years. Each year for 8 years. So nicely done. So that was the compromise. Now you can come in. And Andrew Jackson, what does Andrew Jackson do here? It is 8% total, Zach. You're correct. How does Andrew Jackson factor into this little game? Jessica says that Andrew Jackson says, y'all can't go doing that. That would be about right. What did he say he was going to do? Build an army and try to crush it, but Clay passes the compromise, make sure Jackson doesn't get credit. And he also doesn't, hey, also threaten the military. What Drew said, that is correct. You are right. If you look at that, that is absolutely what happened. If you look here, here's what you guys just said. This gives you some explanation as to why A, B, and D are incorrect. And then down here it talks about the Constitution doesn't support the view, but it doesn't refute the view, which is why this is a constitutional crisis. And the 10th Amendment does protect the right of states, but The Constitution didn't collapse. Henry Clay figured out the compromise. The world was saved. But the question of this one, whether the states are sovereign, in other words, whether the states can determine the constitutionality of a law, is not settled. And of course, that will be the question that comes down to the Civil War is, are they legally bound to remain in the Union? So nicely said and done there. Let's see here. Let's take a look at Jackson supporters. So remember, first, we know this is the Maysville Road veto. And it says here, which of the following political figures agreed politically with Jackson's stance on appropriations and internal improvements? Now, that's where you're going to have to stop and think about, do you really have to read the question or not? And so so let's take a look at if you have to read through the Maysville Road veto or not. Take a look under the answer choices. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury under Washington. Henry Clay, Speaker of the House. John Quincy Adams, the former President of the United States, or Thomas Jefferson, the former President of the United States. You're saying Jefferson. Okay. Now, let's take a look before we submit this and see what this says. How gratifying the effect of presenting to the world the sublime spectacle of a republic of more than 12 million happy people in the 54th year of her existence, having passed through 2 protracted wars, one for the acquisition and other for the maintenance of liberty, free from debt and all her immense resources unfettered. What a salutary influence would not such an exhibition exercise upon the cause of liberal principles and free government throughout the world? Would we not find ourselves in its effect an additional guarantee that our political institutions will be transmitted to the most remote posterity without decay? A course of policy destined to witness events like these cannot be benefited by a legislation which tolerates a scramble for appropriations that have no relation to any general system of improvement, and whose good effects must of necessity be very limited. So, take a look. You're still saying Thomas Jefferson? Respond by putting the answer. So is this still the answer that you're choosing after looking at the text of the document of the stimulus? If it is, reaffirm by putting down the answer, the letter. Is this your final answer, children? Drew says, sure, it's D. Gabby says it's D. David still thinks it's D. I need one more. And Cameron says D, but with his little emoji of I don't know. And that is correct. So Jefferson thought that Jackson was a dangerous man, but this comes down to it. Jefferson likes strict construction, unless it's the Louisiana Purchase, and he believes that this would not be permitted under the Constitution because there's no law, there's no way it says that the federal government pays for roads. So the We know that Jefferson wanted to cut the power of the federal government. Jackson is about common man. Jefferson's about common man. But we also do know that Jefferson had to give up this for a time. So nicely done. Let's see another difficult one. Same stimulus. Jackson's position on internal improvements opposed what previous actions taken by the federal government? Congress created a transcontinental railroad. Congress commissioned the building of the National Road, which crossed the Appalachian Mountains. Congress created the first factory in New England, or Congress increased funding of the United States Navy. So Drew started us off with a B. Cameron is thinking. Jessica says B. Zachary says B. Gabby says maybe A. David Sun is saying B, but I'm getting all these like little question marks. Cameron, you said sure, B. Very assured there. Why are we not sure if it's B? Are you making a reasoned guess? Oh, Jessica is getting a little impatient with her. It's B because overall, it is correct. Turnpikes, canals served as the major source of transportation until the railroads were constructed. Choice A, where you were talking about when you were talking about Congress creating a transcontinental railroad, that does happen, but not until during and after the Civil War. So, yeah, there you go. And Congress doesn't really create it so much as they call for the building of it, and they'll help subsidize the cost. So, there you go. Nicely done. The National Road, or the Cumberland Road, can be called either on maps because it goes through the Cumberland Gap through the Appalachian Mountains, which was a natural kind of break that allowed for easy building of a road. That was built in the early 1800s. And so it was great. It was awesome for farmers to do that. So they did have a precedent of funding something for the national good that went through states. But we know that Andrew Jackson is like, no. Is it still in use? I think an interstate highway is there, Drew. Someone can look that up while we move to another question here. Let's go to the Bank of the United States. Okay, remember, first, we're going to look at the question. Then we glance through the answer choices. Question says, Andrew Jackson used which of the following arguments to justify his veto of the Bank of the United States recharter? Congress lacked authority over economic matters inside state boundaries. The national bank lacked the authority to issue currency for use in individual states. The Supreme Court expressly outlawed a national bank, or the full faith and credit clause required states to honor other states' financial decisions. Now, let's take a look. A, but B, only B, C out of process of elimination. Zachary asks, Jessica's guessing A. You haven't even seen the. You haven't seen the thing. It's definitely A. Jessica says. Ryan is saying A. Drew says A. Cameron says A. All right, so let's take a look. Veto message, 1832. By its silence, considered in connection with the decision of the Supreme Court in the case of McCullough against the state of Maryland, this act takes from states the power to tax a portion of the banking business carried on within their limits, in subversion of one of the strongest barriers which secured them against federal encroachments. Banking, like farming, manufacturing, or any other occupation or profession, is a business, the right to follow which is not originally derived from the laws of the Constitution. The state banks are a qualified restoration of the right which has been taken away by the laws against banking, guarded by such provisions and limitations as in the opinion of the state legislatures the public interest requires. These corporations, unless there be an exemption in their charter, are, like private bankers and banking companies, subject to state taxation. The manner in which these taxes shall be laid depends wholly on legislative discretion. It may be upon the bank, upon the stock, upon the profits, or in any other mode which the sovereign power shall will. So this is his veto message regarding the Bank of the United States. What is Jackson saying here first? And don't go look it up. I wish I had the Jeopardy tune to play, but I don't. So for the viewing audience that may view this later, this is obviously a place of dead air. But anybody understand what he's saying here? What does Andrew Jackson's veto message say in plain English? Ooh. Federal banks are a business and they aren't in the Constitution, Drew says. Thank you, Drew. So why then veto it? He says that banking is like other things where it's not derived from the laws, i.e. federal laws, and that it's up to the states to have those rights. So, okay, I'm going to say I completely agree with you two on that, Jessica and Drew. What then is the reason for the veto? It violates the 10th Amendment? Well, that is an inherent thing, but he's using a really clever little trick here. I'm going to help point out the clever little trick. If you look up here, he says, you got to kind of go back and a little like down here and then back there. What he's saying is that corporations are allowed to be granted by the states. The Bank of the United States, as envisioned by Alexander Hamilton, was a public-private entity where the majority of it would be owned by private investors, and the government would be part of the investor group. Therefore, it would be operating as a private institution that the government was helping to support. So it wasn't necessarily a government established bank. So it's a little bit of trickiness there. But what he's saying, Andrew Jackson is saying, is that when the Supreme Court ruled in the McCulloch decision, it ruled that the state of Maryland could not tax any branch of the Bank of the United States within its borders. They had attempted to tax it like they would any other corporation because it's supposed to be a private institution. And then because McCulloch says there cannot be a tax on any federal thing, a state cannot tax the federal government, and because of that reason alone, and because states should be and are granted that right, and because the federal government says you can't tax the Bank of the United States, it would not be constitutional in his mind to allow the Bank of the United States to exist because it violates the state's rights to tax private institutions operating within its borders. So Gabby says he's saying that the BOTUS is a corporation that shouldn't be supported by the federal government. So Gabby, yes, he is saying that because that is his belief. And they believe that it's a tool of the rich. And of course, Jackson believes himself to be the leader of the common man. And Maryland had attempted to tax the Bank of the United States in an attempt to try to kill it. That went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, since the bank is operating for the federal government, it cannot be taxed. A state can't tax the federal government. So Andrew Jackson's using a really tricky legal maneuver here. States have the right to tax any private institution operating within its borders. But the McCulloch decision said that the bank couldn't be taxed. Therefore, the bank can't exist because the recharter would allow for it to exist without being taxed under a Supreme Court decision. So Congress lacks authority over economic matters inside state boundaries is true. Andrew Jackson spelled out the eventual demise. His opposition stemmed from two primary objections. He hated the centralized power of the bank and believed it favored the wealthy and property. Moreover, Jackson favored states' rights on this issue. It takes from the states the power to tax a portion of the banking business carried on within their limits in subversion of one of the strongest barriers which secured them against federal encroachments. That would be the 10th Amendment. The document expresses this argument. It asserts the rights of the state to handle financial affairs within their borders. This reasoning led Jackson to remove all federal funds from the national bank and place it into state banks. Because McCulloch versus Maryland said you can't tax the federal bank, and that's the right of the states, so I'm going to veto it. I'm going to take the money, and I'm going to put it in the state banks, and I'm going to cause major financial disarray. Of course, he didn't think he was going to do that, but that's what happened. So, nice. Now, let's do one more question on McCulloch versus Maryland. Supreme Court affirmed which legal principle in the decision Jackson referenced above? States control intrastate matters except financial ones. States lack the power to nullify a federal law. The Constitution granted the federal government implied powers to create institutions to enforce their powers, or the Constitution granted the federal government to power to charter banks, but not the states. What legal principle is stated in McCullough versus Maryland? How many of you are still online? 43 of you? 21 of you. Ah. So Zachary says C. Ryan says C. Druvita says Z. Sophia says 21. Cameron, you're still here. Thank you. And you say C as well. Ryan says it said states could not tax the bank. Sorry. Well, it does say that, but what does this say? Does that say that? Does C say that very thing, Ryan? And says the implied powers Congress could make the bank with the implied powers and whatnot. Okay, whatnot. All right, here we go. It gave a firmer legal standing to that idea of the implied powers. And remember, we've talked about this in class. The necessary and proper clause grants implied powers, powers not explicitly defined in the Constitution, but assumed to be necessary to execute the expressed powers or enumerated powers named in Article 1. So we look at Andrew Jackson here. This gives you a little more. He favored states' rights except for the nullification of the tariff by South Carolina. Jackson objected to the Supreme Court usurping the power of the states or the federal government. In this excerpt from his veto message, Jackson cites the main legal justification for the national bank, thereby trying to undo the argument made by the court. So, here we go. Implied powers are essentially given the go-ahead as an existing power of Congress by McCullough versus Maryland. It upheld that the necessary and proper clause allowed for the creation of a bank because of the need for carrying out the expressed powers, which included taxing, coining money, etc. Okay? Here's another one that you got to look at. Fletcher versus Peck. Whatever respect might have been felt for the state sovereignties, it is not to be disguised that the framers of the Constitution viewed, with some apprehension, the violent acts which might grow out of the feelings of the moment, and that the people of the United States, in adopting that instrument, the Constitution, have manifested a determination to shield themselves and their property from the effects of those sudden and strong passions to which men are exposed. The restrictions on the legislative power of the states are obviously founded in this sentiment, and the Constitution of the United States contains what may be deemed a Bill of Rights for the people of each state. Question says, which of the following events best demonstrates the federal government exercising the power described in the first paragraph of the passage above? Missouri's entry into the Union as a slave state, the decision to use the military to enforce tariff collection in South Carolina, the rejection of Texas entering the Union, or Polk's attempts to get the Oregon Territory. Ryan says, wasn't this the one that some dude sells some land that was declared invalid? Okay, could you get a little more specific than that? Sorry, that was for Fletcher versus Peck. Drew says Polk was a homie. Fletcher versus Peck was that state laws unconstitutional. What, all state laws are unconstitutional, Jessica? Georgia committed land fraud, according to AMSCO. The state of Georgia, you're saying, Jessica? So it's like Georgia gives land to like 4 dudes. Just the land fraud thing, okay? Drew is asked to see the first paragraph again. Jessica affirms that she is referring to the state of Georgia. And then the legislature voids the law and tries to take the land away. Yeah, correct. So you're saying that these best demonstrate the federal government exercising the power. You're going with B? Some dude. Jessica says, a case involving land fraud in Georgia, Marshall concluded that the state could not pass legislation voiding a contract. Peck says that it was valid and legal. And the first time the Supreme Court declared a state law to be unconstitutional and invalid. So you're saying that that refers to the military, the decision to use a military to enforce tariff collection in the South. Let's put that down. And you are correct. Now, take a quick look at that one. That little explanation for those of you who are taking some notes. Okay. Let's take a look at just a couple more here. Okay. Here we have King Andrew I, born to command. Had I been consulted, a veto memory. Here you have Constitution of the United States down here at the bottom. And this says internal improvements, U.S. Bank. He holds in his hand the veto. Okay. Which of the following 19th century politicians would be most likely to support the ideas expressed in this cartoon? James K. Polk, Henry Clay, Martin Van Buren, or John Eaton? Cameron says B. Gabby says B. Jessica says oops. Drew says B. Cameron says B. B, 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 B. Jessica says she was on the other one. Do I have 3 B's, 3 B's and a D. Do I have a 4th one? Oh, I got to go with this because you've all gone quiet on me. You are correct. Are there only 4 of you online? Well, there's 17 of you, but that's okay. Henry Clay is probably the most frequent victim of Jackson's veto if you want to look at any one person. So if you look here, there was a corrupt bargain Jackson accused Clay and John Quincy Adams of doing that made Jackson lose the 1824 election in the House of Representatives. Jackson believed that Clay's American system was unconstitutional. Hi, Erica. And Jackson absolutely hated the Bank of the United States. Thought it was too powerful and only used to further the interest of the wealthy and not the common man. And of course, Clay made that a major thing. Clay did nothing wrong. Polk loved Andrew Jackson and was a fellow Democrat and a Tennessean. Martin Van Buren was Jackson's Secretary of State and then his vice president and was Jackson's most trusted advisor. He couldn't have been against the veto. And John Eaton was the co-author of a book about Andrew Jackson. Jackson helped him out. Pray for Clay. Okay. So here is what you got to remember to do. The point of all of this was not just to review content, but to remember that we got to practice using what we can and put ourselves in the position of having to take a test without the benefit of our notes. So don't forget, if you are online with me tonight, still, if you go to, for example, my website, markvanover.weebly.com, go to AP U.S. History, go to Helpful Study Links, and under General Study Links, you could do, for example, APUSH review videos in 10 minutes for each of the periods. That would be something that could help you at this point. You could also go to History Heart Lady, U.S. Quiz main page. And on the U.S. Quiz main page, you would be looking at Jeffersonian age. There's 3 quizzes. Early industrialization and economic growth, the age of Jackson, and reform movements. Now, you could also look at westward expansion and manifest destiny. However, that's kind of a in between what I do with the next unit and this one. So, and I might even put some of that into unit 6. So even though it's kind of an in between, we'll take a look at it. But these definitely apply. And now keep in mind, these are not stimulus questions. Stimulus questions are hard to come by. If you want to go to Albert, you can find the free questions. And on Albert, which we were using, Albert, all the easy ones are free questions, but at least it give you an idea of format. At least it give you an idea of how to approach these things, but also it does help you review. Now, if you want the things like we were looking at, and there's tons of questions over period 4, then they have a subscription available, and you don't have to do that. What you got to be able to do is also be able to recognize issues. Even on the stimulus that's provided, you have to be able to link them to actual things. Jessica says that you're saying the free questions are like the first 30 to 40-ish questions? Mostly easy and medium with a sprinkle of difficult. Okay. And you're talking about the full version, Jessica, or are you talking about the free questions? No. Okay, got it. So the free questions are about first 30 to 40. Okay, so here you have all kinds of things that will help remind you of content. And if you don't get an answer correct, then you can then go back and look at it. Now remember, Missouri Compromise and Texas Annexation. Those are 2 topics that I'm putting into the next unit. So you don't have to worry about them for this particular test. Okay? This is your one quick opportunity before we go to ask me some questions. Do I hear any questions? Can you go into the Charles River Bridge thing? When are we getting the SAQ? Why do you hate Hamilton? AMSCO didn't cover it. So Jessica, the Charles River Bridge decision has to do with bridges in Boston and toll bridges and whether or not anyone has the exclusive rights to operate. What you want to do is go and just do a quick little Wikipedia search, and you can find that information. I don't hate Alexander Hamilton. I'm just not a fan of musicals. So set the record straight. I think Alexander Hamilton was a brilliant economic person. I actually like his plan. And it makes me a very conflicted individual because I also admire the ideas of Thomas Jefferson, but I don't agree with his view on an agrarian society. I like industrialism. I like what it's done for the country. I don't, so in other words, our country was very successful because of Alexander Hamilton. I think he was a misunderstood man. And of course he was unceremoniously shot by Aaron Burr, but I don't hate Alexander Hamilton. I'm just not a fan of musicals. And I know it's brilliant and I know it's modern and all that. I'm not saying that the musical's bad. I just don't like them. Okay. So T. Jeffy just wants to be chilling on a farm. Yep. It's a good place to retire, but not live your entire life and make the whole nation do that too. How's that? And I don't even want to do that when I retire because I don't want to have to take animals and pick vegetables and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Any other questions? SAQ, worry about that later. Millen, glad to see you're still lurking there. You didn't take part as much tonight. You didn't give everybody somebody to take down. Feels bad. So Air of Good Feelings is that everyone is happy. So yeah, I mean, Jessica, the air of good feelings, we also call it the air of bad feelings because it was only good in that there wasn't 2 political parties fighting. And instead, you had the sections of the country fighting. But there technically was no political party or you can say that the Democratic Republican Party / the Democratic Party today was the only one that existed. But it certainly wasn't all warm and fuzzy like the title suggests. But in terms of government, it was good in that we did not have the political infighting along party lines that you saw emerge right after the government was formed under the Constitution. There's lots of fighting going on because they're fighting about things for their section, but it does get called the era of good feelings. It's filled with nationalism and optimism when the key issues are looming. Is that the gist, Jessica says? Is the gist of the era of good feelings that it's filled with nationalism and optimism when key issues are looming? Yes. Everyone feels great. We didn't lose the War of 1812, so we won it. Yay, America. We start to form our national identity and our culture. That's where you get things like the national literary movements that you should have looked at yesterday. And I posted a video about some of that, especially like the transcendentalists. We also have the emergence of a uniquely American art form with the Hudson River School, the landscape artists. We see the creation of an American language with Noah Webster and Webster's Dictionary. So we begin to, as a nation, over the course of the time from the War of 1812 through the time of the industrialism, through the time of the market revolution, we find that there is this unique expression of American, and that's all great. Everyone feels wonderful, but there's lots of bad things lurking under the surface. So let's remove that. Let's block. What would a potential prompt by the College Board say about the era of good feelings? Evaluate the extent to which the era of good feelings was appropriately named. Despite being supposedly an era of wonderful feelings and heavy nationalism and pride, to what extent was there a unified sense of purpose in the United States in the period of the era of good feelings? Cameron, the period 4 study links, I discovered today that somehow that was deleted, that page. So I have to remake it, and I'm not going to be able to remake it tonight. So I'm sorry about that. But if you look at what you see on period 3 and period 5, you'll see that it's basically, you can go to the Gilder Lehrman's site and watch their review videos for each of the period. You could go to, for APUSH review, you could go to Adam Norris, his YouTube channel. He's got key concept reviews. And you can also watch period reviews at Jokes Productions, who you guys call the dorky history teacher guy. Okay? Yes, it was a ripperoni on that one because it was totally angering to find that that page somehow went missing. I had to have deleted it in some way for it to just completely disappear, but I didn't know I did that, so I'm not really happy. Dorky history teacher guy definitely does have that. Yes, you saw that question is answered. Eliana has asked, are all of the court cases equally important? They're important because especially those early martial court decisions, you really should be familiar with those because they're important because they set up the way the judiciary works. They clarify some questions that weren't necessarily answered in the Constitution and make it very clear that the federalist vision of a stronger central government is going to prevail over the state governments. Not totally to the expense of all the rights the states have, but it's definitely going to be, it's going to set up that idea that the federal government will always prevail when looking at questions of certain state laws, the idea of regulating interstate commerce, upholding the value of contracts through the contract clauses. And so essentially, and then when you go into the later decisions, like for example, Worcester versus Georgia, or you have You have Fletcher versus Peck, Dartmouth College versus Woodward, and those are very much important cases to know. If they end up on the unit guide, for the most part, those are Supreme Court decisions that are subject to being tested. Jessica is actually giving very, very nice advice here in defining Supreme Court or federal government powers. Gabby has asked a specific question about second period tomorrow because of the emergency drills. I'll make that stuff up tonight. I have to finish doing a couple things to your test. So, but essentially, I'll have a point where your test should end before 10:19, and then pick up again when we come back in. Okay. That, my friends, we're at 10:15 p.m. and I'm still at school and I still have to go home. So, Jessica, I will say I left for a while and I did come back, but I stayed up in the area. So I haven't been home today. I do want to wish you luck as you study. Please do make sure that you, I'm still waiting for the traffic to die down. Yes, Drew. If we lived in LA, that would be a fruitless thing. But I want you to make sure that you don't stay up too late. I know evidently there seems to be a physics test tomorrow too. So sorry. I'm sorry that you have 2 tests on one day. But I know that also staying up too late is counterproductive, causes more psychological stress than you need to be under, and also results with you not being able to focus as much, which would be counterproductive to what you need to do for a test. You are all very, very welcome for the live stream. It is my pleasure to do that for you. I'm sorry you have a test in Francais. Is that Attack on Titan for my profile pic? Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. Mon Dieu. You guys, you're more than welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm very happy to have been able to do this with you guys. I hope it helped. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to stop by in the morning. No quiz corrections tomorrow. It is Country Clubber Day, so remember to dress up for your extra credit. And make sure that you are also, but if you want to stop by, I don't guarantee any time tomorrow morning. I don't know what time. I have to do some things in the morning here at school before class, so you're welcome to stop by and see if I'm around if you have any questions. But otherwise, I'm going to wish you all a good night. Again, don't stay up. No quiz corrections tomorrow morning. Drew. It's all in the sign up. So, wish you all a good night. Hope you all enjoy your evening and revel in the learning of APUSH period 4. And I hope that you're excited as I am to demonstrate and celebrate your learning tomorrow with our unit test. So there's no sarcasm at all in any of what I just said. So I hope you all have a great night. Don't stay up late. Thanks for joining me. Bye.